I want to welcome you to our AJA Lunchtime Live. I'm Kimberly Carroll. I am the director of Animal Justice Academy. And today we are talking about the power of storytelling in animal advocacy with Indra Lahiri. And I am so happy to have all of you compassionate and determined beings here with us live. Welcome to those of you as well who are watching the replay. We love to have you here in whatever form you can. Indra, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Today we're going to talk about why storytelling is such an effective tool in influencing people and how we can best apply that to our animal advocacy. But Indra, let me give an official introduction, okay? Indra is a fascinating person, and you've seen her bio, but I'm going to give you just a short little reminder. Indra has been called a storyteller, a dreamer, a friend of the animals by the Anishinaabe medicine man who adopted her into the tribe of the White Earth Nation. She's rescued thousands of animals from dire circumstances around the world, and she tells their stories in her writing and speaking, and also lives amongst them between her travels. And that is at the sanctuary that she founded. This is back in 2005, Indra founded Indraloka Animal Sanctuary. And since 2014, Indra has volunteered her time as a consultant, helping other sanctuaries to succeed. And she's also taught, mentored, coached, and keynote addressed tens of thousands of people on a range of topics that are always at their core based on ethical leadership and compassion for all. Indra has done keynotes addressing audiences as varied as Asian scientists, bloggers, veg fests, and peace activists. Her award-winning blog, which chronicles sacred moments with rescued animals, is followed by tens of thousands of readers on every continent. And Indra is just so grateful to have the opportunity to dedicate her life to helping traumatized animals rediscover joy, love, and trust. Indra, I'm so happy and excited to dig into your story a little bit. So first of all, can you share a little bit about your journey in animal advocacy and the sanctuary and what led you to the storytelling aspect of what you do?
Yeah. Well, actually, the two things developed together kind of on parallel tracks in my life. Storytelling on one track and the love for the animals on another track. So from the time that I was small, I was finding animals and bringing them home with me. This is just, I think I must have been doing this in another life because as soon as I could walk, the story goes from my parents, I was just kind of collecting animals and bringing them home. And my parents, happily for me, were very supportive of that. So that was happening all of my life. And at the same time, I was always in love with words themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I, even from an early age, I found I was constantly narrating what I was seeing around me in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Just the stories were just coming out naturally about what I was experiencing. When I was in my young adulthood, I had the opportunity to study as part of my my work for my dissertation, to study with the people of the White Earth Nation. And that's an Anishinaabe tribe. Some people know them as Ojibwe or Chippewa. They call themselves Anishinaabe, so that's the name that I like to use.
And that's what their First Nations here use in Canada. So
good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
So during that time that I spent with them, they were kind enough to adopt me into the tribe and allow me to take part in some of the sacred rituals that are not open to the general public. Many of those involve stories, as we all know, and many of those are stories that outsiders never get to hear, that are kept sacred as they should be. And I had the beautiful opportunity to learn these stories and learn from these stories. And one of the things that they taught me was that as a story is being told, it's actually happening again in that moment. And you and I both become participants in that story, as well as all of the people who are in the story. And by people, we mean all of the people. Okay, so that boulder is a person, that plant is a person, that tree is a person. Certainly that horse or that dog or that fox is a person. Right. So all of those people are with us, and the story is happening again in this moment, and we are now part of it. So that was something that really meant a lot to me, and caused me a lot of struggles when I was working on my dissertation, because in those days they were saying, no, you can't say that. You can't say that the story is really happening again, because it's not. And you can only say what you can actually observe, and that's not actually, So we went round and round on that. Since then, there's been a lot of research done that shows that, in fact, the same parts of our brains are stimulated when we hear a story, or when we tell a story, or when we experience that story.
I love,
So,
Indra, I love this idea of, and I didn't even think of this as far as the power of stories, is that people aren't just listeners. When you tell a story, you're pulling them in. They become part of it. Yeah. So I mean, and even if it's not like narratively, they're not narratively part of it, but they see themselves in it, right?
they're a part of, yes. And then the same parts of their brain are being, so if I tell you a story about someone who's sitting down in a chair, the parts of your brain that sit down in a chair are being activated. So I tell you all of this to explain how this becomes then part of my advocacy with the animals. Because as I'm sure many of you have been and visited sanctuaries before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
probably almost everybody here. Yeah.
And you know that those personal relationships you develop with those animals change your lives so much more dramatically than anything else can, right? And they change the way that we see the world and the decisions that we make as a result of those relationships. But not everybody can go to a sanctuary. Not everybody's willing to go to a sanctuary. And so by telling their stories, the animals' stories, we bring those animals to those people, and again, allow them the opportunity to experience that relationship with that animal. And then their life is changed because of it. Is it exactly the same as having a direct connection with an animal? I don't know. But it's something that we found has really been working well for us, and has been a very effective tool. Last year alone, our research indicates that we reached 40,000 people, 76,000 people with our stories. 40,000 of those decided to go vegan. So
how many?
40,000.
Wow.
And those are not all people who came to the sanctuary by far. So, this is why I say that when we can really bring that story to life for those people, then we can bring them there with the animals and allow the animals to speak for themselves, which is really the goal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're always talking about speaking, for the animals, giving a voice to the animals. It's like, no, they're like, they have a voice, they're speaking loud and clear. And it's just our job to figure out how to bring that to people and how to help them understand it.
We need to listen. Absolutely. Whenever people say the animals are voiceless, I say, no, it's very clear that they have voices, but we need to listen. And we're not always as good at doing that as a species.
Well, so Indra, I really want to see what we can learn from you about storytelling to make us better animal advocates. But first, I just want to make it clear to folks that storytelling isn't just about like orally relating stories. Can you talk about, how the tenets of storytelling can be applied to other things?
To everything. Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, all of us are telling stories all the time. It's the basis of human connection and communication. So stories are in everything that we do. From this conversation that we're having right now, is we're creating a story together that we're all sharing, right? Certainly our social media posts are great opportunities to tell stories. Certainly, if we ever create videos, those are great opportunities to tell stories. And in every other way that you can go to the grocery store, and as you're paying the cashier, tell a story about what happened that morning, right? And that cashier might then tell a story back to you. This is how we relate as individuals. This is how we develop connections as humans. So it's in everything that we do.
So that's just interesting. I love that idea of just those small stories in those moments, and why not when it's sort of on topic or appropriate, especially going through with a cashier, why not be able to say, hey, you know, like something around animal advocacy, a little story, a little something.
And you're right, as it's appropriate. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't want to be like weird, but
Love that. No, we don't.
we're all pretty weird already, probably.
We are, but we try to hide it the best we can.
We want to be socially appropriate so that people want to listen to us, but certainly we want to hear their stories, and we want to share the animal stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. So, I mean, I know that when we even put out press releases, I mean, we need a story. We need stories right off the bat. Like we need to make, you know, media folks be able to see it immediately.
That's a very good example of when you absolutely have to have a story. You want to start it out with a story, and you want it to be dramatic. That and fundraising. Those are two places where you definitely need your stories.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But we need our stories everywhere, because it's how we understand each other and how we understand the world around us.
Well, so let's talk a little bit more about the power of storytelling to be as a learning tool. Organizational psychologist Penn Newhouser found in studies that learning which stems from a well-told story is remembered more accurately and far longer than learning derived from facts and figures. And then psychologist Jerome Bruner's research suggests that facts are 20 times more likely to be remembered if they're part of a story. So what's going on there? What I mean, you sort of talked about the parts of the brain being lit up. Can you talk a little bit more about why it's such a good learning tool?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such interesting research that was primarily started to be done at Princeton University, although there have been many other universities that have replicated it since then, where they actually did MRIs of people's brains while those people were telling stories and while those people were hearing stories being told. So what they found was that in both cases, we are experiencing the story as if it is happening to us. So if I am telling you about a time that I was waiting to hear from the veterinarian about a beautiful little lamb that I was trying to save, and he was in the midst of surgery, and I pick up my glass and I drink the water, you know, as I'm trying to sort of just calm myself and pace myself as I wait for that call. When that's happening, as I'm trying to breathe and calm myself, as I'm drinking the water, the parts of your brain that breathe to calm yourself or that pick up a glass of water are actually being activated. So, and the more emotional the story is for you as a listener, the more you're relating to it, the more those places are lighting up so that you're actually experiencing that happening. Therefore, later, you're able to remember those facts and figures better because you were emotionally involved in the story. So those facts and figures are embedded in your memory of what happened in that story because you experienced it.
Oh, yes, you experienced it. And also we know that especially when there's emotion, the brain tends to hold emotional experiences more than anything, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I just saw somebody mention something in the chat that's also a good point. Emotion is absolutely, for me, emotion is an important heart of every story, but just as much, and I'm sorry, I just saw it, I just saw it go by really fast. So I don't know who mentioned in the chat, but just as much, we want to bring other senses in, right? So you want to share what it smelled like, what it felt like, what you were experiencing, what your emotions were as well, but also the things that you were sensing around you.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk a little bit about why. I mean, so there's the learning tool in animal advocacy. I mean, we need people to be hit by things and remember them. They need to be seared onto the brain. And as activists, we also need to be able to hang on to tools, facts, figures, and everything like that. So that, you know, the storytelling can really help in that capacity. But can you tell us some of the other reasons why you think storytelling is such an important tool in animal advocacy, especially?
Yeah, yeah. And I'll go even further and say it's even more important in farm animal advocacy because there's so many things that people misunderstand about farm animals because there's so
Mhm.
much misinformation out there.
Right.
So by telling their stories, by talking about them as individuals, uh, we're able to give them, you know, we're able to help other people see why they matter, why those beings matter. And I'll give you an example of my best friend Dow. Dow is a sheep. He's about 14 years old, which is quite elderly, and he is he's so full of fluff that he's like hot in February in the mountains of Pennsylvania. You know, like he's just it takes my whole hand. I have a small hand, but still my whole hand goes into his wool to scratch him because it grows that thick. And he was all black and he's now black and gray. And he comes running every time I walk into that pasture, running like full out running. And now, he has arthritis and his legs kind of wobble as he runs and he's sort of partly limping, but he's just running to me with this look on his face. And all I want to do is just run to him and hug him. And he does this for me. If I go out into that pasture 5 times in a day, he does that 5 times in a day. That guy and I have such a close connection. And that's what I want everybody who doesn't get a chance to meet Dow to know. He was going to be somebody's Easter dinner. But instead, he has befriended literally thousands of children. Last summer alone, just one example, then I'll stop. But last summer alone, we had a little boy who didn't want to go to camp. He was so nervous about going to camp. And his parents called us and said, can he come and visit in advance? Because he's so scared. He's always being bullied by the other kids and he's never accepted by any group and he's nervous. So we had him come in advance of camp and he met all of us staff members and the people who are doing the camp counseling, and he met all of the animals in advance. And Dow immediately walked over, saw that kid, and just as if he was waiting for him. He went straight to him and he gave him the biggest hug. And the way a sheep hugs, they just sort of take their head and like sort of wrap it around your legs. That's how you know you're being hugged by a sheep. But he did this for this little boy. And the little boy got to make friends with a lot of the animals, and it gave him enough confidence to come to camp. And I'm telling you all of this because every single day, this child showed up at camp and immediately wanted to go out to the sheep pasture to go see the sheep. Like even before the other kids were dropped off and where, but everyone's still, and he wants to run out there and do that. So after the first week of camp, he ended up begging his parents to sign him up for the rest of the weeks of camp for the summer with us. And by the end of the summer, he said, "I'm not afraid to go to school anymore, because I have friends now, and I know that Dow is always going to be my best friend, even if the kids at school don't like me."
Oh my goodness.
So,
and so in that short little amount of time, we found out that not only is Dow loving, and not only do you have this incredible special relationship with him, but he inspires, and so what else do we need to know to want to save sheep from being Easter dinner?
this is how we change the world. With all of this violence in the schools, all of these things happening all the time, here's a simple, sweet, kind sheep who's taking this kid from being someone who's feeling like a victim, who's feeling like he has no friends, to being someone who knows that he's loved.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And it's so very important. You're right, in farm to animal advocacy, because in this society, we look at cows, cattle, pigs, flocks as these big monoliths, and there's no room for the individual. And so storytelling is a way to just like disrupt that pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
We got to let people see who the animals are, and we've got to let the animals' voices come out through us until we can get people to connect with them directly.
Mm-hmm. There's some tears in this chat. Someone, I'm not crying, you're crying.
I'm always crying.
Yeah, exactly. Because and that's probably one of the really great hallmarks of a storyteller, I would think, Indra, right? Is that you don't just do it by rote. Every time you tell a story, even if it's just a little story, you get into it, you feel it, you revisit it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. We need to get a little bit vulnerable. You know, we need to open our hearts. That everybody's looking for connection. Everybody's feeling alone and uncertain in this world. You know, if we open our hearts and allow a little bit of that connection, it means so much to everyone, but it also means so much to the animals that we're opening our hearts for in order to be able to advocate on their behalf.
Indra, I would, it just sort of occurred to me that one of the things I talk about when I'm talking about how to be more effective in your conversations as an animal advocate is, instead of, saying this is wrong, this is, what's happening, to be able to say through your own lens, this is what I discovered, this was where I was, this is what hit me, and this is what my journey ended up being. And so really, storytelling is so important there, even when we're not talking even specifically about an animal in particular.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Sharing your own experience and what your learning was and what you didn't know before that thing happened. Again, that's part of our vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to be told. Nobody wants to be talked to, certainly not talked down to. But people do want to experience what you've experienced. They do want to relate to you on that level. And
Yeah,
you
and
do have valuable everybody has valuable stories to share.
yeah, I mean, most of us were not born as animal advocates, and I mean, it was a journey for all of us to cut through our own sort of limited thinking and, brainwashing, and to be able to, it's fascinating. I find it fascinating to see the realm of everything that the different things that bring people, through that gateway. And so I love it. And I also think that stories can keep people from going into their defensive mode. Do you find that?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, for example, we tell the animal stories when we take people on tours of the sanctuary. And what we've found is that it's really hard for people to hear the reason that baby cow was going to die was because you had that glass of milk, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they can certainly relate to, he was a lost little baby. He lost his mother. He was alone in the world, and here he was, he literally fell off of the back of a truck and was shaking on a dirt road covered in scabs and road rash, and a young girl in a pink dress on her way to her prom stopped on the road and saw this little calf and struggled with her boyfriend to pick this calf up and put him in the back of her mother's SUV. Instead of going to the prom, they went back home to her mother and said, "We found this baby calf. What do we do now?" And these people were so good and so kind that they figured it out. They found a sanctuary. And Rupert now is about 7 feet tall at the shoulders, and he's about 3,000 pounds. And he comes running to greet any group of children. He adores groups of children. So he'll come running over to the fence, hoping for apples or scratches. And he's someone that would have died because, sometimes we forget what the price is for the things that we imbibe, right? So I feel like that's a much more powerful way to share, than say, don't drink milk.
And so what if people don't, like, you have just all of this treasure trove of your own personal stories because of your work at the sanctuary. What if folks don't have those stories? Can they borrow them? Can they say, this reminds me of a story that I heard from a person from a sanctuary? Like, for example, is that okay? Like, is it okay to take other people's stories if you give them credit and make them your own?
I think in verbal conversation, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And it's very important, as you say, to give credit. where the story comes from. I have sometimes found my stories online in places that I didn't know that they were being shared and that didn't make real clear who wrote them. That kind of thing is always uncomfortable for any of us, right?
Sure,
So
sure.
in that kind of situation, I would say just contact the person. You know, usually if it's an animal activist who wants to share one of our stories, we're happy to do that. We're happy to, you know, to make that okay. But yeah, absolutely. Share other people's stories, but more so go to a sanctuary. They need your help anyways. Well, all of us sanctuaries are struggling. We all need help. So go to a sanctuary, clean the barns, hang out with the animals, fill the water tubs. Before you know it, you're going to have your own stories to share too.
Love that. Just a couple of comments. Oh, and by the way, folks, we are open to questions. If you have a question for Indra, just do *** Q in the chat, and that'll just help us differentiate from comments. Let's see. Debbie asked, re Rupert's story, would it be prudent to make some reference to the dairy industry so people will make the connections?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what I'm doing is giving you little snatches of stories, you know, so because I don't want to take up all of your time with all of these stories. But yes, absolutely. So what you want to do is weave those facts in, you know, so we can tell that story and then follow up with, and, you know, I didn't realize until, and then share when you learned it. I didn't realize about the dairy industry until I already had a sanctuary. Okay, I was rescuing cows before I realized exactly how bad the whole situation was. You know, so I'll share that, and I'll share what I experienced as I learned, what facts I learned and what I experienced, and put that together in one story. So.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what you usually will find at a tour of a sanctuary. You know, this is the story and this is how it relates to the bigger systemic problem. Another thing that Nisha and Jeremy said that I thought was a really cool idea is a great point. Recounting moving videos we've seen online can help those who don't have first-hand experience. What a great idea, because there's so many people that aren't willing to watch the videos, but there's so many great videos out there. And I mean, we've all seen such clever videos, such amazing stories. Just tell that story.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, as the phones are getting better cameras, you know, we're seeing better and better videos coming out, and all the sanctuaries have these incredible moving stories, and they will appreciate you sharing their stories along with what sanctuary they came from. Again, sanctuaries need help. So you can actually be a help to the sanctuaries even by doing that.
So let's get into a few more. We've already touched on quite a few things, but let's get into more brass tacks around what makes a good story. Okay. And as an animal advocate, you know, what are some of the things we need to keep in mind with our storytelling, both in writing and orally?
Yeah. Well, we talked about a couple of them that are important. Certainly opening our hearts, being vulnerable, having an emotional core to your story. Sharing the sensations of the story, you know, what does it sound like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? You know, are certainly important components as well. And we talked a little bit about being humble. You know, and we may not have used that exact word, but we talked about sharing our own learning journey versus trying to do a lot of telling. So I think all of those are core pieces. And I think also then, you know, we simply need some clarity, right? We need a beginning and an end point, and we need something to happen in between. We hope that the something that happens is somewhat dramatic. And part of what makes it dramatic is sharing our own hearts about what we experienced, and also all of the senses. Does that?
Yeah, absolutely. And what about, you know, more sort of tactical things like length, like beginning, middle, end, having a villain? Are any of those things important? I mean, I know if you're writing a novel or you're writing a, you know, short story, sometimes those things are important. How important are they in this form of storytelling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that In terms of length, we need to know our audience and our purpose. Although I will say, in general, in the last, 30 years or so since I spent time with the Anishinaabe people, people's capacity to hear a longer story has gotten shorter. So, but still, I think people are more likely to listen to a story or to watch a video with narrative of a story than they are to read it, in general. But yes, so we have to be quick, but we have to also figure out who our audience is. For example, I'll go back to the sanctuary again. If we're in the middle of giving a tour, we don't want to be too quick then, right? We don't want to rush people through. We want them to really have a chance to experience that. So that's a little bit different than when I know we've got a 1-hour Zoom meeting and we want to pepper a bunch of things in there. So they might be 30 or 60-second pieces.
And are there some things that we should be wary of in our storytelling? Like, for example, I mean, we always have this sort of dialogue in this movement about anthropomorphizing, and how much is okay and how much is exploitative, and all that sort of thing. Any thoughts around that?
Kimberly, I'm really glad you brought that up. So my feeling is that anthropomorphism is a word that was developed by humans who don't actually understand that the animals actually do have personalities and thoughts and feelings and motivations and lives and friendships. Yes, it is, of course, important with our animal friends, as we do with our other human animal friends, that we listen to them, that we don't try to impose our own thoughts and feelings onto them, right? And that we try to represent them in the way that is the most honest that we can and the closest to the truth that we can. But with all of that said, I don't think that there is such a thing as anthropomorphism. There is another thing, though, that came to mind for me when you said, are there things we should be careful about? And I think there are. And specifically, I'd say we probably ought to be pretty careful about drawing parallels between the animal's experiences and human experiences, unless it's an experience that we have had ourselves personally. So if I personally have experienced something that I'm very much relating to my cow friend who has also experienced it, I think that's okay. But if I want to say, this is a lot like what happened to this group of people or that group of people in history that I'm not a part of, that I wasn't part of that experience in time, I think it's easy for us to make mistakes, to not be sensitive to those people's experiences, because even though we mean to be sensitive, there are things we don't know. There's always things we don't know. So I would keep it to your own experience, to the experience of the animals that you've witnessed, or if you're sharing somebody else's story, stay true to their telling of it.
Yeah. So if you're going to tread into a story of, say, a marginalized group, make sure that you're using their exact words or whatever the case may be. But generally, it's best to speak from your own experience.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there's some questions that have come up that I want to throw at you. So there's a lot of questions around the idea of sort of graphic descriptions, graphic imagery. So let's see, someone was asking, I would love to know if showing graphic images hurts or helps the cause, but that's a little bit of a different topic. But Bridget brings it into spoken or visual. I would like to understand this better too. Does it help or harm? I know it helped me understand. So yeah, like is it important to share some of the graphic things, or is it important to not, or does it depend on the audience?
Yeah, I think it's going to be another, it depends. A lot of this stuff, it's more art than science. I personally don't like to show a lot of the graphic stuff. With the animals that we rescue, we often don't share a lot of videos and film and photos in the beginning of kind of what they look like when they first come in, because we want to protect their dignity. And because if I were in that space, I probably wouldn't want that many photos shared. We do share some because we do have to tell people this is what's happening. You know, this is what happened. It happens every day, and we need to know that. But again, different people feel different ways. One of my very best friends watched one of those undercover videos that is so shocking, and that for her was what changed her whole life. And since then, she's gone on to make huge differences in the world. For me, I can't watch one of those videos. I haven't watched any of them through. I'll be honest with you, not any of them. You know, maybe it's because I already have the connection with the animals. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. So I think the best thing to do is try to understand your audience as well as you can and do what feels right to you. I mean, you're really going to have to listen to your intuition on almost all of this.
Well, Tenebrae here said, I thought I knew my audience but horrified a friend by sharing a Beyond Carnism video about what it feels like to be vegan with just drawings and no photos. And I think probably Tenebrae, I was the one who's just, you know, it's the one about the dogs and, you know, like, can you imagine if we're dogs? And so in that case, I guess probably Indra, that people may sometimes have a strong, maybe not the reaction you were hoping from them, but that doesn't mean that stories don't stay with somebody and plant a seed. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some dogs barking in the background.
No worries, we love dogs. they're just pleasant in the background.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't too loud.
Yeah, no, not at all.
So yeah, I think visuals are going to be important for sure in our stories. And that's partly why we want to describe things if we don't have visuals. But if we have photographs or film, I think that's certainly going to be very helpful. And sometimes it'll be graphic. Sometimes it'll be terrible. I mean, those of you who have seen our sanctuary recently, we just rescued 2 pregnant sheep from a horrible situation where there were just dead animals everywhere. And, you know, they were so skinny and they're still so terrified. And we did have to share that, but we want to balance that with then lots of other stuff of the positive, you know, of the animals that are rescued and living happily and in a good space. And just, you know, we want to make sure it's not going to be all down all the time because nobody's going to want to come back to that.
Yeah, it really is. And I guess that's just in even a single story. If you're going to tell, you know, if you're going to describe what's happening, is there something that you can give at the end that inspires hope? Because if we just depress people, if we just basically push them down onto the ground into a puddle of weeping, it's not terribly helpful because they're like, oh, what's the point?
Right.
So would you say an effective story has a point of hope or action or a calling type thing?
Yes, certainly. For a story that you're using for advocacy, yeah, we want a purpose to that. What is it that we are hoping that our audience will do? You know, and you may even ask yourself the question before creating your story. And I do think that hope is a big part of it. I think that a call to action coupled with hope that the action will make sense, that the action will make positive change is useful. I also think it's helpful to remember a story if there's some seed from the beginning that comes back in the end. You know, it can be any little connection, like even, you know, if in the beginning of my story, I'm sharing with you about an interaction I had with one individual animal, then at the end, I'm just going to mention again, I'm going to mention her or what her lesson to me was, or even a visual, you know, maybe we watched the sunset together. And then at the end of the story, I'm seeing another sunset, you know, or right? We want to bring it full circle, but also have some hope and a point.
Yes. And I mean, honestly, we don't like, I don't want to scare people off of just telling little tidbits here and there. You don't have to have a fully formed and a realized story for it to be effective. Am I right, Indra? But if you're, yeah.
If you're going to a speaking engagement and they've asked you to tell some stories, right? You want to have them like prepared and ready and kind of more fully formed. If you're having a conversation in the grocery store with someone, it's going to be your 30-second version that you probably haven't thought through that well, but it's an example that you have at the ready.
A couple more questions. Ken says, does describing an animal's emotion by using human emotion a fair depiction of an animal's state of mind, such as happy, sad, or scared?
I would say absolutely that all of the animals that I've ever known can be happy, sad, or scared. I will say that sometimes if a person isn't that healthy, then they may see something in the animal and think it's what the animals fit. They may project their own feelings onto the animal. I've had this happen before. I once had a woman come to the sanctuary, and she loved the animals so much. She was so worried about them being in pain all the time. She saw the peacock, and he was displaying his tail feathers. And I said, look, this is a great opportunity for you to see how he does this and what his little dance is and how he moves around and what the sound the feathers make. And she said, oh my God, I can't bear to watch. Does it hurt him? Does it hurt him to have his feathers up like that? So, in that case, that was an example of she was clearly feeling so much pain that she was seeing it in someone else. So we want to be careful that we can distinguish between the two. But when we're pretty sure we're in a healthy space and we're seeing an animal, what they're showing you is probably what they're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Nisha and Jeremy ask, I wonder what your thoughts are around language and any specific words you try to use or specific words you avoid using. And they said, thank you for this great session.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I try to be careful with language. I never allow anyone to use the word own with an animal. Like even when you take an animal to the vet hospital, they have a form that says owner. I cross it out and I put guardian, and then I point it out to them when I hand it in. I'm sure they think I'm a pain. I'm really careful never to say it when I refer to an animal. I refer to them as he or she or they, depending on how I think they want to be referred to. I try to make sure that when I refer to other humans, that I point out that the other humans are animals too. We're all animals. And that's important. We're not separated from them in any way. We're all related, in my opinion. We're all connected. So those kinds of things I try to do, to even like the word pet is a word that I'll try to avoid using.
Absolutely. Animal companion. I don't even like using companion animal because it's about a use attributed to an animal. I like to say, this is my animal companion, Yeah.
And sometimes it starts getting awkward to like find all the words and do, and that's okay. Sometimes we'll take a shortcut and we'll just say something because it's just easier to say it that way. But in general, I think as we think about how we communicate about the animals, I think that the words that we use are indicative of how we view them and how we relate to them.
Absolutely. Robin asks, when telling a story that includes our reactions, do you have any tips on how to keep it about the animals and not about ourselves? And she put in brackets, insecure storyteller here. I think you have to insert yourself because you're the one telling the story. It's through your eyes, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to think that through, and I'm coming to the same conclusion. I mean, you're in it. You experienced this story, so you do want to tell that animal's story, for example. Okay, so I talked earlier about the little baby lamb and being waiting while he's in surgery at the hospital. When I shared that story on my blog, it was absolutely from my perspective. It was from my experience for the first time feeling like a mother and about what it felt like losing him. So that absolutely, I did want to tell his story, but I was in the story too. And I couldn't take myself out of it because it wouldn't have been truthful, and then it wouldn't have impacted others.
Yeah, absolutely. So Robin, I'm just, honey, you're worth taking up space. That's all I'm going to say. Put yourself in the story. By the way, folks, I just wanted to say, I forgot as we passed over the language thing, we have an amazing module in week 1 of the program by Leslie Bisgold about language mattering as far as animal advocacy goes. So if you haven't already watched that, she, the ones that we touched on, but far more, it's really important. It's a really important module to watch. Okay, so I want to know what are some of the best kind of, and you don't need to tell them, but some of the stories that maybe you've seen in campaigns in the movement or historical stories in the movement that you've felt are particularly strong or you've seen particularly have an effect?
Yeah, well, I want to talk about someone who doesn't have a sanctuary, who hadn't had a lot of experience with farmed animals directly, who is a really powerful advocate. I don't know if all of you have heard Dotsie Bausch's story.
Oh, I know of her, but I don't know all of her story. No.
So she runs Switch for Good, which is an organization that I strongly recommend. They do great advocacy work. But Dotsie is an athlete, and she talks quickly. I won't share it in the length that she does, but she talks about how she suffered from an eating disorder and she had a drug problem, and she got to a point where she was about 30 pounds, and she's tall. I mean, she was nothing but skin and bones. She was about to die, and she didn't care. She wanted to die. Okay. She was just so unhappy in her life and in her world, and started working on that, after nearly dying, and with intervention, started working on that and working on her own health. And as part of working on her own health, she became an athlete. She started cycling. She ended up being a world champion cyclist, and she then was going to the Olympics. She was getting ready for the 2012 Olympics after having overcome this drug addiction and this eating disorder. And now here she is, one of the best cyclists in the world. She watches a video and she sees what goes on dairy farms. Just in the middle of the night, happened to stumble across it. Sometimes you can't sleep and you're seeing one thing leads to another thing. Sees this video, changes her world. As she is preparing to go to the 2012 Olympics, and she realizes she cannot eat meat or dairy anymore. Everybody said she was going to have to give up her Olympic bid. She was already the oldest contender that had ever even been allowed to be eligible for her discipline of cycling. So everybody thought she had to give up. Her trainer thought she had to give up. Her family thought she had to give up. She thought she might have to give up, but she thought she'd try. She ended up being faster, better, stronger than she had ever been before. She literally doubled her leg strength in terms of pounds that she could move with her legs when she went vegan. So she tells that story still today. And now today, she obviously, has continued to age and continues to remain in excellent shape and is a top-notch athlete because she went vegan. So, there's a way to share a story that is powerful advocacy for the animals, even if we don't have that direct relationship with the animal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of our AJAers, Michelle Oberg, who I don't think is here today, but Michelle's got her own great story. She was a pizza addict. Like she just pizza all the time. And then she discovered what was happening in the dairy industry and just her journey. And so she just tells little stories. She just started a blog where she tells story after story of this transition from like a pizza addict to, this animal advocate today. And so it's really like, who are you and what's your unique background? You're going to be able to speak to people that others can't speak to, find your stories. And Indra, do you recommend, like, I have my little stories that I kind of keep in my back pocket that I know are ones that are effective and ones that I can really connect with and I can pull out in different situations. Do you have that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kimberly, you just said something that's really important. Well, you've been saying it throughout, and I just want to point it out, is that every single one of you has important stories that nobody else can tell. And those words if you don't share them, somebody's life isn't going to be changed. Somebody out there needs to hear your story in exactly the shape and form that it's in exactly the way that you tell it. Somebody needs to hear that you are a worthwhile human being and you can make a difference in this world by just opening up and sharing. And there are things that you think aren't interesting. We think they're fascinating. We want to learn about you. Yeah. This is a natural thing. Human beings want to know about other human beings. We are social animals.
And especially if they love you, if they're involved, like if they're a friend of yours or a colleague, they want to know, they're curious about you, right?
Well, and if you let them get to know you, they will love you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's the other piece of it.
Yeah. Well, Indra, I would love to go on forever and ever. And I'm sorry if I missed a couple of questions, folks. I tried to get them in, but I really would love for you to leave us with a story today. Do you mind telling us one more story?
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay.
I was trying to make my way through the barn. It was dark. There were images everywhere, like large shapes that I couldn't quite make out, and they were moving. I could hear some breathing. And there was an overwhelmingly pungent smell of ammonia and manure. As I made my way further through the barn, calling out, "Jimmy, Jimmy," it's the farmer whose barn it was. I started to get a clearer ability to see as the shapes started to come into images, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. And I saw that they were cows, and each one of them was chained by the neck in this small space, so that when they pooped, they would poop into this trench, and the trench would then take the poop away. So they were all forced to stay in that position so that they could do that. But I don't know if you've ever seen cow poop. It's just messy, it's liquidy, and it doesn't really fall in one place. So it didn't really fall in a trench. It just splattered all over the cows, and all over the aisleway where I was walking was slippery with the manure. And then I came across Linda. Linda was a cow that was laying in the center aisle of this barn. And the way that she was laying, her sisters beside her, with their chains on their necks, couldn't help but defecating on Linda's head. So her head and face were just covered with this runny manure, and I was wiping manure off of her eyes and wiping it off of her face. And I knew this cow. And the reason that I knew this cow is because 2 days ago, I had just rescued her baby. The farmer had told me that he didn't like that he had to sell the boy cows for veal. He didn't like that part of his work at all. And so he asked me if occasionally I would take a little calf, and I said yes. And so this was one of them. I had come that morning and taken this baby calf, and another one had just been born that night, and he let me have 2 calves. So I went home with 2 calves, and I thought, I don't want to feed them chemicals, and that's all that's available in the commercial milk replacer. So I said to the farmer, "Could you please let me come back and get milk from their mothers, because that's really what they need?" And he said yes. So I had gone back to the barn looking for Jimmy, the farmer, so that he could give me their mother's milk. And what I found was Linda, and she was one of the calves' mothers. And there she was, laying in the aisleway. I had wiped the manure from her face the best that I could, and I could see that she was in pain. There was a clear look in her eyes of distress. Running my hands all over her body to try to figure out what was happening to her, and where she was hurting, what was wrong. It became really clear to me that she was hemorrhaging, and that she had been hemorrhaging since giving birth 2 days before. So I looked at her, and I just knew, the way you just know sometimes. I just knew in my heart that she was staying alive because she had just given birth, because she didn't know where her baby was, and she had to take care of him. I mean, this is universal. This is something any one of us who's been a mother understands. Any one of us who's been a father understands. Right? once you have that baby, your world changes and you live for them. And she was literally keeping herself alive for that baby. So I said to her, I have your baby. And I promise you, I'm going to love him. I'm going to take care of him every single day of his life. It's okay. You can go now. I will take care of your baby. And she sighed. And she laid her head in my lap. And she died. After figuring out how to lift her very heavy head off of my lap, which was a challenge in and of itself, I sort of stumbled out of the dark barn and found Jimmy, the farmer, at his house. And I told him what had happened, and he said, "Oh, man, I can't believe she's dead. She was my best milker. She just gave me 5 gallons this morning." And I said, "Jimmy, I thought you said she'd been down since 2 days ago." And he said, "Yeah, she has." So prior to that moment, I had been the kind of vegan who wasn't super careful. I mean, I didn't go out and buy gallons of milk at the store, but I didn't read ingredients. I didn't pay a lot of attention if I went to somebody's house and they were kind enough to offer me a piece of cake to find out what was in that cake. After that happened, I have never, ever, ever touched even the tiniest drop of dairy again. I read every label and I ask every single time what's in there, because I never want to be part of separating that mother and that baby. Do it for Linda.
I think we need to go back to gallery view. Kirsten, if you can bring us back to gallery view. That was, I didn't have Kleenex nearby, Indra, so thank you for warning me.
I should have gotten some for myself too.
Yeah, right.
I didn't know I was going to tell that story.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Diana saying tears now, powerful. Melissa said this story. Oh my God. Yeah. And if I can, I hate to dissect this, but we are workshopping this, but you started by setting a scene that had some intrigue in it. Then you described it in such detail that we could really feel it. And then you did the backstory that heightened the stakes. And then there was the emotional connection. And then you brought it back to the system. You brought it back to the system that we're all trying to, that we all need to fight. And then you brought it back to Linda. I mean, that is how you tell a story, folks. Thank you, Indra. Thank you so much.
The thanks goes to Linda.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for all of the animals out there for allowing what we can be as humans, as horrible as we can be, that you let us near enough to you to be able to tell these stories. So, folks, can we please give Indra, if you're not on gallery view, make sure you're on gallery view. Can we please give Indra a beautiful Animal Justice Academy? Thank you for this beautiful and helpful workshop. So many wonderful comments that I'm going to share with you, Indra, later, because I'm sure you're not going to have a chance to see them all. So folks, thank you, Indra. Anything else you want to say before?
I just want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy, busy lives to be here with us today, and for listening and for sharing your questions. And thank you so much, Kimberly, for doing this. You're making a world of difference for animals everywhere. Thank you,
Indra. Thank you so much for telling your story, mentoring us all through this. It's just so important. And you've really, really, I knew stories were important, but now I really know how important stories are. So thank you so much for this. Folks, I just want, before you go, I just want to say in 2 weeks, our topic is, and this is going to be a good one, should dogs and cats be, or can dogs and cats be vegan, with Dr. Andrew Knight. And this is a hot button issue, even in our civil community. So I expect it's going to be a really interesting one. Dr. Knight is the one with some of the studies and numbers that are just really sort of blowing things open. And he's going to be laying it all out for us on February 9th. If you're not already on our email list to get notices for our events, make sure you sign up at animaljusticeacademy.com. And last but not least, folks, if you like what we're doing in Animal Justice Academy, please, think about supporting us at Animal Justice. Kirsten will put that link there. There, she's so fast. Even just a little bit helps us keep this programming going, and helps to keep animal advocates effective, enduring, and goddamn good storytellers, right, Indra?
That's right.
And please do check out Indra's work at the sanctuary, Indraloka Sanctuary, and Kirsten will list that one more time. There we go. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Indra, and have a wonderful day. And let's tell some stories, okay, folks, for the animals.
Thank
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.